Rosa had never imagined she would one day work in a mansion so big that her tiny apartment could fit inside its living room. The tall iron gates opened with a slow creak as she walked in with her small suitcase in one hand and her son Leo's hand in the other. The morning sun reflected off the glass windows of the Parker estate, and everything around looked spotless, too perfect for someone like her. Rosa was nervous. She had worked as a maid before, but never for people this rich. The Parkers were known in the city for their grand parties and expensive taste. Mr. Parker was a successful businessman, and his wife, Mrs. Evelyn Parker, was famous for her beauty, elegance, and sharp tongue. Rosa had heard that Evelyn was not an easy woman to please, but she had no other choice. After her husband died in an accident 2 years ago, she had been struggling to raise Leo alone. When she got this job offer, she told herself she would do her best, no matter how difficult it might be. Leo, a quiet boy of 10, held her hand tightly. He was small for his age, with curly hair and thoughtful brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. He didn't speak much, but he had a calm, gentle nature that made people like him once they got to know him. Rosa looked down at him and whispered, "Be polite, my love. Don't touch anything unless they say it's okay." Leo nodded quietly. As they entered through the large front doors, Rosa couldn't help but stare at the shiny marble floor, the chandelier hanging like a crystal waterfall, and the huge painting of a woman in a blue gown above the staircase. A painting that looked exactly like Mrs. Parker. A tall butler greeted them with a polite nod. "You must be the new maid," he said. "Mrs. Parker is expecting you. Follow me." They were led through long hallways filled with paintings, golden mirrors, and flower arrangements that smelled too expensive to touch. Rosa felt smaller with every step. When they reached the living room, Mrs. Parker was sitting on a white couch reading a magazine. She didn't even look up at first. "You're late," she said, flipping a page. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Rosa replied softly. "The bus, excuses," Evelyn interrupted. She finally looked up, her sharp blue eyes studying Rosa from head to toe. "You'll clean, cook when asked, and keep to your quarters. My husband prefers the staff to be invisible." Her gaze then moved to Leo, who stood behind his mother's skirt. "And what's this? You brought a child?" "Yes, ma'am," Rosa said quickly, her heart pounding. "I have no one to look after him, but he won't disturb anyone, I promise." Mrs. Parker sighed. "He stays out of sight. I don't want my guests seeing a little boy running around the house. This is not a playground." Rosa nodded, whispering a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." The butler showed them to a small room behind the kitchen. It was tiny, just a single bed, a small table, and one window facing the garden. But Rosa smiled anyway. "See, Leo?" she said cheerfully, trying to sound brave. "We have a place to sleep and food to eat. We'll be fine." Leo didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on something he had seen earlier while walking through the hallway. A grand piano, shining under the sunlight, its keys white like pearls. He had never seen anything so beautiful. Music had always fascinated him. Back in their old neighborhood, he would stop outside a music shop just to listen to the melodies coming from inside. But here the piano seemed like a dream, something too far for someone like him. The first few days in the mansion were hard. Rosa woke up before sunrise and worked until late at night. She cleaned the large rooms, polished the furniture, and served the Parkers during their meals. Mrs. Parker barely spoke to her unless it was to complain. Still, Rosa never argued. She smiled politely, thanked the butler for small kindnesses, and tried to stay positive. Leo spent most of his time in their small room, reading old magazines or drawing on scraps of paper. Sometimes Rosa let him sit in the garden when she was sure Mrs. Parker wasn't around. He would sit under the big oak tree, watching birds and listening to the faint sounds of music coming from the open windows. One afternoon, as Rosa was dusting the hallway, she noticed Leo standing near the music room door, staring at the grand piano again. She rushed over. "Leo! You can't be here," she whispered, pulling him away gently. "I just wanted to look, Mama," he said softly. "It's so pretty," Rosa smiled sadly. "I know, my love, but it's not ours to touch." Just then, Mrs. Parker's voice echoed down the hall. "Rosa, are you done yet?" "The guests are arriving soon." Rosa's heart skipped a beat. She quickly bowed her head and hurried off, leaving Leo glancing one last time at the piano. That night, when everyone in the mansion was asleep, Leo sat by the window of their small room. The moonlight shone through the glass and he could almost hear the faint echo of the piano's notes in his imagination. He hummed quietly, moving his fingers in the air as if playing invisible keys. Down the hallway, in the still silence of the house, the grand piano waited. Polished, perfect, untouched. And though Leo didn't know it yet, that piano would soon change his life forever. Rosa, exhausted, looked at her son before turning off the light. "We'll be okay," she whispered. "One day things will get better." But fate had already begun to stir. In the grand house where rich people played their games, a maid's son was about to make everyone see that true talent and true worth can come from the most unexpected places. The next morning, the sun shone softly through the tall windows of the Parker mansion, turning the white marble floor golden. Rosa was already awake, preparing breakfast in the large kitchen, her hands moving quickly but carefully. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. Leo sat quietly in the corner, drawing on a scrap of paper, waiting for his mother to finish. He always stayed close to her. The big house made him nervous. It was too quiet, too perfect, and he always felt out of place in it. When Rosa left to clean the upper hallways, Leo followed her with his eyes until she disappeared behind the kitchen door. He sighed. He didn't have toys or books to play with here. Sometimes he talked to the gardeners or fed crumbs to the birds outside, but today, the sound of faint piano music floated through the hall, and it drew him like magic. He walked slowly down the corridor, the echo of his small footsteps bouncing off the tall walls. The sound grew clearer, elegant, soft, graceful. When he reached the open doorway of the music room, he froze. There it was again, the grand piano. Its surface shone like glass, and the light from the chandelier danced across its golden edges. No one was in the room. For a long moment, Leo stood still, afraid to go in. His mother's words echoed in his head. "It's not ours to touch." But the piano seemed to call to him like it was waiting. He took one small step forward, then another. His heart raced, but curiosity won. Finally, he stood beside it and placed his hand on the cool wooden edge. He could see his own reflection in the glossy surface. Slowly, he sat on the bench, which felt too high for his short legs. He looked around once more, and no footsteps, no voices. The whole mansion was still. He lifted his hand and pressed a single key. A gentle note filled the room, soft but clear, and he smiled. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever made. He pressed another key, then another. At first, he just played random notes, laughing quietly each time one echoed. But soon, something strange happened. The notes began to connect, forming patterns he didn't understand but somehow felt. The melody that came out was simple but full of emotion, like a song he had always known but never learned. Outside the room, Mrs. Evelyn Parker was giving instructions to the butler when she suddenly heard the faint music. She frowned. "Who's playing my piano?" she snapped. She followed the sound down the hallway and stopped at the music room door. For a second, she didn't believe her eyes. There was the maid's boy sitting confidently on her piano bench, fingers moving gracefully across the keys. His eyes were closed and he seemed lost in another world. Evelyn's face turned red. She pushed the door open sharply, and the sudden noise made Leo jump. He froze, his hands mid-air. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Leo stood up quickly, his small hands trembling. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I just wanted to hear how it sounds." Evelyn crossed her arms. "Do you know how much this piano costs? It's worth more than your mother will earn in 10 years. Who gave you permission to touch it?" Leo's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't speak. The guests who had arrived early for the afternoon tea began to peek into the room, curious about the noise. Evelyn turned to them, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Well," she said loudly, "if you can play this piano so well, maybe I should adopt you, Her tone dripped with sarcasm. The guests chuckled, thinking it was just another one of her jokes. Leo looked at her, confused. "Adopt me?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said mockingly, leaning closer. "If you can play something worthy of this house, I'll adopt you myself." The laughter from the guests echoed in the large room. Rosa, who had been dusting the stairs, heard the commotion and rushed in, her face pale. When she saw her son standing by the piano and Mrs. Parker smirking, her heart sank. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Rosa said quickly, grabbing Leo's hand.
"He didn't mean any harm. Please forgive him." Mrs. Parker waved her hand dismissively.
"Just make sure he stays out of my sight. This is a home for civilized people, not a playground for servants' children. The laughter faded as she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the floor. Rosa's face burned with heels clicking on the floor. Rosa's face burned with shame. She looked at Leo. His eyes were downcast, his shoulders small and defeated. She wanted to say something comforting, but her voice broke. Back in their small room, Rosa knelt down and cupped his face. "Leo, you must be careful," she said softly. "People like her don't understand us. They don't see what's inside." Leo nodded, but the hurt in his eyes lingered. "I didn't mean to make her angry," he whispered. "I just wanted to play." "I know, my love," Rosa said, stroking his hair. "But sometimes the world isn't fair to people like us." That night, Leo couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the piano in his head, not the angry voice of Mrs. Parker, not the laughter of the guests, but the music. The notes had felt alive under his fingers. He wanted to touch them again, to prove that he could make something beautiful even in a place where no one believed he belonged. As the mansion grew silent and the lights went out one by one, Leo sat up in bed. The moonlight painted silver lines on the floor. He looked toward the door, then at his mother, who was sleeping deeply from exhaustion. Quietly, he got up and tiptoed out of the room. The hallway was cold and dark, but he knew the way by heart now. When he reached the music room, he opened the door just enough to slip inside. The piano stood there, gleaming faintly under the moonlight, as if waiting for him. He sat down and placed his fingers on the keys again. The first note was soft like a whisper, then another. Slowly, the melody returned, warm, gentle, full of feeling. In that quiet, empty house, Leo played his heart out, unaware that his music was about to change his life forever. That night changed something in Leo, not just inside his heart, but in the way he looked at the world around him. He realized that the piano wasn't just a fancy object that belonged to the rich. It was a voice, his voice, one that could speak when words failed him. But he also knew he couldn't let Mrs. Parker see him again near it. She had humiliated him once, and he didn't want his mother to suffer for his curiosity. Still, every night when the mansion grew quiet, Leo felt that same pull. The grand piano sat in the music room like a secret he couldn't forget. He would lie awake, imagining its keys under his fingers, the notes filling the air. Finally, one evening, when Rosa had fallen asleep, he couldn't resist any longer. He tiptoed out of bed and made his way down the dark hallway. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the big clock in the hallway. When he reached the music room, moonlight spilled across the piano's shiny surface, making it look almost magical. Leo sat down and gently pressed a key, then another. The sound echoed softly, filling the empty space like a whisper. He didn't know how to read music or play properly, but something inside him seemed to guide his fingers. The notes came naturally, forming small melodies that felt familiar yet new. He played from memory, little tunes he had heard on TV or from the radio in the servants' quarters, and slowly began to create his own. His movements were uncertain at first, but as the minutes passed, the fear faded. Unbeknownst to him, someone was watching. Mr. Harris, the old butler, had been doing his final rounds for the night. He had served the Parker family for over 30 years, and nothing in that house surprised him anymore, until that night. As he walked past the music room, he heard faint music, soft and tender. Curious, he peeked through the slightly open door. There he saw the maid's boy, small, thin, sitting under the moonlight, playing the grand piano like he had been born for it. His eyes were closed and there was a peaceful smile on his face. The melody was simple but full of emotion, full of honesty. Mr. Harris stood still, his chest tightening with something he hadn't felt in years: pride. When Leo finally stopped playing, he jumped at the sound of slow clapping. He turned to see the butler standing there. "I'm sorry, sir," Leo said quickly, terrified. "Please don't tell Mrs. Parker, I'll never touch it again." But the old man smiled kindly. "Tell her?" "No, my boy," he said softly. "I wouldn't dream of it." "You play beautifully?" "Where did you learn that?" Leo hesitated. "Nowhere, I just remember sounds. They stay in my head." Mr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "That's called having an ear for music," he said. "It's rare and it's special." He looked at the piano, then back at the boy. "Would you like to learn properly?" Leo's eyes widened. "Learn, but I don't have a teacher. And my mother can't pay." Mr. Harris chuckled. Money isn't everything, child. When I was young, I wanted to play too, but life had other plans. Perhaps it's time I pass on what I know. From that night onward, their secret lessons began. Every evening, after everyone went to bed, Mr. Harris would meet Leo in the music room. He brought out old sheet music, explained the notes, and showed him how to position his hands. Leo learned fast, faster than anyone could imagine. He memorized songs after hearing them once, and his small fingers began to move across the keys with surprising grace. Sometimes Rosa would wake in the middle of the night and find Leo's bed empty. She worried, but when she saw the light from under the music room door and heard faint music drifting through the hall, her heart softened. She didn't stop him. For the first time in a long while, she saw her son smile again. Weeks passed and the boy's confidence grew. He started experimenting, mixing pieces, creating melodies that made even the old butler emotional. "You have a gift, Leo," he would say, patting the boy's shoulder. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." But the mansion was full of eyes, and secrets rarely stayed hidden. One evening, while Leo was practicing a new piece, he didn't notice that the door was slightly open. Outside, one of Mrs. Parker's friends, Mrs. Dalton, had come early for dinner and heard the music. She was amazed. "I didn't know you had hired a new pianist," she told Evelyn later that night. "Such a talented boy. The emotion in his music is simply divine." Evelyn frowned. "A pianist? There's no one playing in my house right now." Mrs. Dalton smiled. "Oh, but I heard it myself. I peeked into the music room. A young boy was playing your piano. I assumed he was part of the entertainment." Evelyn's expression hardened. She didn't like surprises, especially in her own home. The thought of that maid's child touching her piano again made her furious. That night, as Leo finished his practice and quietly closed the lid of the piano, Evelyn was already planning to find out what was going on. The next day, she told herself, she would catch the boy in the act and teach him a lesson he'd never forget. But what she didn't realize was that the lesson she planned would backfire, because sometimes the smallest spark of talent can outshine even the brightest chandelier in the grandest of mansions. And Leo's spark was only beginning to glow. Days turned into weeks, and life in the Parker mansion continued with its usual rhythm. Quiet mornings, busy afternoons, and elegant dinners that filled the house with laughter and perfume. For most of the servants, it was just another routine. But for Leo and Mr. Harris, something magical was happening in secret. Each night, when the mansion lights dimmed and Mrs. Parker retreated to her grand bedroom upstairs, Leo and Mr. Harris slipped quietly into the music room. The old butler brought out worn music sheets and whispered instructions, showing the boy how to let his fingers flow like water over the keys. Leo learned fast, astonishingly fast. What took most students weeks to master, he absorbed in a single evening. He didn't just play music, he felt it. Each note carried emotion, like he was telling a story through sound. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and the melody would come alive, soft and full of dreams or strong and bursting with hope. "Do you see, my boy?" Mr. Harris would say, his wrinkled eyes glowing. "Music doesn't come from your fingers. It comes from here." He would tap his chest lightly. "The heart is where the song begins." Leo nodded, smiling shyly. He admired Mr. Harris. The old man wasn't just a teacher. He had become a friend, a protector, and in many ways, a grandfather figure he never had. Rosa began noticing the change too. Her son was happier. His eyes sparkled when he talked about melodies and harmonies, even though he still tried to hide it from her out of fear. She was proud but also scared. What if Mrs. Parker found out? That woman could be cruel. But every time Rosa heard the faint sound of the piano drifting through the halls at night, she couldn't bring herself to stop him. The music was too beautiful, too full of life to be silenced. One evening, as Leo was finishing a lesson, he asked quietly, "Mr. Harris, why do rich people have everything? Big houses, fancy clothes, and even pianos. But they don't seem happy." Mr. Harris smiled sadly. "Because, my boy, happiness isn't bought with money. Some people fill their homes with gold but leave their hearts empty." He paused. "But you play with your heart. And that's something money can't buy." Leo thought about those words for days. He started noticing things. How Mrs. Parker would host big parties but always looked lonely afterward, sitting silently with a glass of wine. How the servants rushed to please her, but she rarely smiled. It made him wonder if she even remembered how to feel joy anymore. A few days later, the mansion buzzed with activity. Mrs. Parker was hosting her annual charity gala, an event that gathered the wealthiest families in the city. Servants ran up and down the halls polishing silver, setting up tables, arranging flowers. Rosa worked tirelessly, her hands red from cleaning. Leo watched quietly from the corner of the kitchen, fascinated by the preparations. That afternoon, Leo overheard two maids whispering. "Did you hear?" one said. "The famous pianist Arthur Bell is performing tonight. Mrs. Parker paid a fortune for him." Leo's eyes widened. A real pianist. He had never heard one live before. The thought filled him with excitement and envy all at once. He wished he could just stand near the stage and listen, even if it was from behind a curtain. When night came, the mansion glowed with golden light. Cars arrived one after another, carrying guests dressed in sparkling gowns and sharp suits. Laughter echoed through the corridors and soft classical music played in the background. The dining hall shimmered like a dream. Rosa worked quickly, refilling drinks and passing trays of food. Leo stayed hidden near the servants' door, sneaking glimpses of the elegant scene. He saw Mrs. Parker laughing among her guests, radiant and confident. But when the pianist began to play, her smile faded just a little, as if the music stirred something buried deep inside her. Arthur Bell's performance was breathtaking. His hands moved like magic, the notes rising and falling with perfect precision. Leo watched, completely mesmerized. For a moment, it didn't matter that he was the maid's son or that everyone looked down on him. All that mattered was the music. He whispered quietly to himself, "One day, I'll play like that." But fate has a strange way of listening to wishes. A few days after the gala, a message arrived. Arthur Bell had fallen ill and wouldn't be able to perform at Mrs. Parker's next charity dinner, which was only a week away. Panic spread among the staff. Evelyn was furious. "I can't host a gala without music," she exclaimed. "Find another pianist." But the butler, standing quietly in the corner, cleared his throat. "Madam," he said cautiously, "I might have a solution." Mrs. Parker frowned. "Well, speak." "There's a young boy. He's been learning the piano in secret. He plays beautifully." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "A boy? Whose boy?" "Rosa's son, ma'am." The room fell silent. Evelyn blinked in disbelief. Then she laughed, a cold, sharp laugh. "The maid's son? Have you lost your mind, Harris? I'm hosting the city's most important people, not a village talent show." "He's remarkable, ma'am," the butler insisted softly. "If you heard him once, you'd understand." But Evelyn waved him off. "Enough, don't waste my time with nonsense." Still, Mr. Harris didn't give up. That night, when Evelyn passed the music room on her way to bed, she heard faint music, soft, haunting, and deeply emotional. She paused, listening. For a moment, she forgot her anger. The music was simple yet breathtaking, full of something raw and pure. She pushed the door open quietly. And there he was, the maid's son, lost in the melody again. For the first time, she didn't interrupt. She just stood there in silence, watching. The moonlight shone on his small frame, and every note he played carried a feeling that words couldn't describe. When he finally finished and looked up, their eyes met. Hers wide with surprise, his full of fear. Evelyn didn't speak. She turned and left without a word. But that night she couldn't sleep. The music replayed in her mind over and over, and though she didn't know it yet, that small boy, and the one she once ridiculed, was about to change not only the way she saw him, but the way she saw herself. The morning of the charity gala dawned bright and full of excitement. Servants rushed about the Parker mansion, carrying trays of crystal glasses, setting up tables covered in white silk, and arranging flowers in golden vases. The whole house smelled of roses, perfume, and nervous energy. Mrs. Evelyn Parker was at the center of it all, walking briskly from room to room in her elegant heels, barking orders and fixing last-minute details. Everything had to be perfect. The guests, the decorations, the music, the image. The charity gala wasn't just a party for Evelyn. It was her yearly moment of glory. The city's most important people would attend. Business leaders, socialites, and even a few politicians. Her reputation depended on it. Every year she made sure the event was flawless, the talk of the town. But this year she was troubled. Her hired pianist, Arthur Bell, had fallen ill just 2 days before the event. She had tried calling other musicians, but all were booked. The thought of a silent ballroom, with no elegant piano music to impress her guests, filled her with frustration. "A gala without music is like a wedding without a bride," she snapped. Mr. Harris, standing quietly beside her, cleared his throat. "Madam, I believe I may have a solution." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You said that yesterday, Harris. Unless you've found me another professional." "I don't want to hear it." "I haven't found a professional," he said carefully, "but I have found someone who can play beautifully, with more heart than anyone I've heard in years." Evelyn sighed impatiently. "Who?" "Leo, ma'am," the butler said softly. "Rosa's boy." The air went still. Evelyn turned slowly. Her expression one of disbelief, then laughter escaped her lips in a sharp, amused laugh. "You mean the maid's son? Harris, are you joking? You want me to let a servant boy entertain my guests? That's absurd." "With respect, ma'am," Harris said gently. "If you give him a chance, just one chance, I think you'll be surprised." Evelyn rolled her eyes and waved her hand dismissively. "Fine. If you're so sure, let the boy play something this afternoon. If he doesn't embarrass himself, maybe I'll consider it." Harris bowed slightly, hiding a hopeful smile. "Thank you, ma'am." Later that day, Leo stood nervously in front of the grand piano, his hands trembling. The enormous chandelier above sparkled like 1,000 tiny suns. He looked small in the large room, dressed in his plain shirt and worn trousers. Rosa stood in the doorway, twisting her apron in her hands, her heart racing. She couldn't believe what the butler had convinced Mrs. Parker to do. "Just breathe," Mr. Harris whispered. "Play like you always do. From here." He tapped his chest. Leo nodded, his brown eyes wide with fear and determination. He sat down on the piano bench. The keys looked different today, brighter, heavier. He took a deep breath, then began to play. At first, his hands moved hesitantly, but soon the melody filled the room, warm, flowing, full of emotion. The notes told a story of struggle, love, and hope. Rosa's eyes welled up with tears. The butler smiled proudly. Even the maids who were dusting the hallway stopped to listen. When the last note faded, there was silence. Evelyn sat back in her chair, surprised. For the first time, she couldn't find words. She had expected noise, chaos. But what she heard was something rare. The boy didn't play like a servant. He played like someone who had lived 100 lifetimes. She stood up slowly. "That was decent," she said, her tone colder than she intended. "You'll play tonight. But if you make a single mistake in front of my guests, your mother will lose her job. Understood?" Leo swallowed hard and nodded. Rosa stepped forward quickly. "Please, ma'am, don't," but Evelyn held up her hand. "Those are the terms. If he's as talented as Harris claims, he'll be fine." Then she turned and left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Rosa rushed to Leo, holding his hands. "You don't have to do this, baby," she whispered. "We can leave. We'll find another job." Leo shook his head. "I want to do it, Mama. I can do it." His voice trembled, but his eyes were full of quiet strength. Mr. Harris placed a gentle hand on Rosa's shoulder. "Trust him," he said softly. "That boy was born for the piano." When evening came, the mansion transformed into a glittering wonderland. Candles flickered, and guests in elegant gowns and tuxedos filled the hall with laughter and chatter. Waiters carried trays of champagne, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed under the golden ceiling. Behind the heavy curtains, Leo sat at the piano, waiting. His palms were sweaty, and his heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He peeked through the curtain and saw Mrs. Parker standing near the front, smiling confidently as she welcomed her guests. She didn't even glance at him. Mr. Harris leaned down and whispered, "Remember, play with your heart, not your fear." Leo nodded. When the lights dimmed slightly, a hush fell over the crowd. Mrs. Parker stepped forward and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special performance, one that may surprise you." Her tone was proud but also slightly mocking. "Please welcome." "Leo." Soft murmurs spread across the room. The guests looked around, confused. A few of them chuckled when they saw a small boy walking toward the piano. Leo climbed onto the bench and placed his trembling fingers on the keys. For a second he froze, every whisper, every stare pressing down on him. He thought about running. But then he remembered his mother's tired smile, Mr. Harris's kind eyes, and the feeling of the music that lived inside him. He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, uncertain, like a whisper in the dark. But then the melody grew, He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, uncertain, like a whisper in the dark. But then the melody grew. He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, uncertain, like a whisper in the dark. But then the melody grew stronger, fuller, brighter. It filled the hall with warmth and light. The laughter stopped. The guests leaned forward. The music told a story they didn't expect, of love, pain, and dreams too big to fit inside a small life. Rosa, standing by the doorway, pressed her hands to her heart, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her heart, tears spilling down her cheeks. When the last note faded into silence, no one moved. Then suddenly the hall erupted in applause, real, thunderous applause. People stood clapping, cheering, even wiping tears from their eyes. Mrs. Parker sat frozen, her lips parted in astonishment. She had mocked this boy once, but now she couldn't deny what she saw and heard. Leo stood up slowly, bowing shyly. He looked toward his mother, who smiled proudly through her. Tears. The little boy who once wasn't allowed to touch the piano had just made everyone in that grand room listen and feel. The grand ballroom was filled with silence so deep that it felt like time had stopped. Every eye in the glittering room was fixed on Leo, the small boy who had just finished playing the grand piano with the skill and emotion of a master. His fingers still hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, as the last note lingered in the air like a fading whisper. Then, suddenly applause erupted, not polite clapping, but thunderous, heartfelt applause that shook the chandeliers. Guests rose from their seats. Women dabbed tears from their eyes, men nodded in admiration, and whispers rippled across the room. Who is he? He's just a child. The maid's son, they say. Leo looked up, startled by the noise. He had never been clapped for before. His eyes darted toward the crowd and then found his mother, standing at the edge of the hall. Rosa was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth. Her whole body trembled, not with fear but with pride. Mrs. Evelyn Parker, who sat at the head table, didn't clap right away. She was too stunned. Her sharp blue eyes stayed fixed on Leo, as if trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. The boy she had once ridiculed, the one she had called a servant's child, had just silenced an entire room of millionaires with his music. Mr. Harris, standing discreetly near the wall, smiled with quiet satisfaction. He whispered under his breath, "I told you, my boy. Play from the heart and the world will listen." After a few long seconds, Evelyn finally began to clap, slowly, hesitantly. The crowd followed her lead and soon she was standing too. But unlike the others, her face showed not just admiration. There was confusion there and something else she hadn't felt in years. Humility. When the applause faded, she stood up and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, forcing a graceful smile. "This young man's performance was truly unexpected." Laughter and nods filled the air. Evelyn turned toward Leo. "Tell us, boy, where did you learn to play like that?" Leo looked nervous but answered softly, "Nowhere, ma'am. I just listen and play what I feel." The crowd gasped, impressed by his honesty. A few people clapped again. Evelyn blinked, surprised. She had hired professional musicians who couldn't move people the way this child just did. And yet, here he was, wearing a simple shirt and trousers, barefoot under the piano bench, stealing the hearts of everyone in the room. Mr. Parker, who had been quietly watching from his table, stood up. A calm, warm smile spread across his face. "That was extraordinary, young man," he said. "You have a rare gift. You reminded us all what true music sounds like." Leo lowered his head, blushing. "Thank you, sir." Mrs. Parker forced a small laugh, trying to regain control of the moment. "Well," she said loudly, "it seems we've discovered a little prodigy among our staff." The guests chuckled politely, raising their glasses. But Evelyn's voice trembled slightly when she continued. "Perhaps talent really can come from anywhere." As the night went on, people approached Leo, shaking his hand, praising him, asking his name. Some even offered to sponsor music lessons or performances. Rosa stood back, overwhelmed, unsure whether to smile or cry. Her boy, her quiet, gentle boy, had become the star of the evening. When most of the guests had gone, Evelyn approached Rosa. Her usual proud expression was gone. She looked softer, almost human. "Your son, he's remarkable," she said quietly. Rosa bowed her head. Thank you, ma'am. Evelyn hesitated. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened slightly. I may have misjudged him, she admitted at last. And you, Rosa's eyes widened. She had never heard such words from her employer. He just loves music, ma'am, she said softly. That's all. Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with something like regret. Yes, and perhaps that's something I've forgotten how to do. Love something purely. Then she turned to Leo, who was wiping dust off the piano keys. Leo, she said gently, how would you like to play again tomorrow? For just me? Leo looked up in surprise. Really, ma'am? Yes, she said with a small smile. Really? That night, long after the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, Evelyn sat alone in her grand sitting room with a glass of wine in her hand. The sound of Leo's music still played in her mind. Not just the melody, but the feeling behind it. For years, her life had been filled with luxury but not warmth. She had surrounded herself with expensive things but had forgotten what joy felt like. She realized something simple but painful. The maid's son had more grace, heart and beauty in his little hands than she had ever known in her entire life. Upstairs, in the servants' quarters, Rosa tucked Leo into bed. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, kissing his forehead. Leo smiled sleepily. Do you think she liked it, Mama? Rosa smiled faintly. Oh, my darling. She didn't just like it. You made her remember what it means to feel. Leo's eyes fluttered shut, the sound of applause still echoing in his head. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. Not because he lived in a grand house, but because his music had touched hearts that even wealth couldn't reach. And somewhere down the hallway, Mrs. Parker stood quietly outside the door, listening to the soft lullaby Leo hummed as he fell asleep. She smiled, and a real gentle smile, and whispered to herself, Maybe the boy I ridiculed will teach me how to be human again. That night, the mansion didn't feel quite as cold as it usually did. The grand piano stood silent, but somehow it seemed alive, like it was holding on to the memory of the boy's music. The boy who had changed everything without meaning to. The next morning, the Parker mansion felt lighter, though no one could explain why. The servants whispered about the night before, how the maid's son had played like a professional, how the guests had wept and applauded. Some said Mrs. Parker had even smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years, but no one dared speak of it too loudly. Leo woke early. The sunlight slipped through the curtains and danced across his face. For a few seconds he thought it had all been a dream, the applause, the laughter, the glowing faces. But when he looked down at his hands, he smiled. They still felt warm from the keys. His mother, Rosa, was already awake, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed. She looked at her son with pride and disbelief. You were wonderful last night, she whispered. Everyone was clapping for you, my boy. Leo smiled shyly. Did Mrs. Parker like it? Rosa hesitated. I think she did. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Rosa jumped up quickly, smoothing her apron. Standing outside was Mr. Harris, holding a folded letter and smiling warmly. Good morning, he said. Mrs. Parker wants to see Leo in the music room. Rosa's heart raced. Did something happen? Mr. Harris shook his head. No, my dear. Quite the opposite. When Leo entered the music room, Mrs. Parker was already there, dressed in soft morning silk, holding a cup of tea. The same piano he had played the night before gleamed in the sunlight. She looked at him for a long moment, her usual coldness replaced by curiosity. Come closer, she said softly. You play very well. Thank you, ma'am, Leo replied, his voice barely above a whisper. She set down her cup. You made my guests cry last night, she said with a half smile. Do you know how rare that is? They don't feel much, those people. Neither do I most days. Leo didn't know what to say, so he just looked down, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. Evelyn stood up and walked toward the piano. Play something for me again, she said. Something that makes you happy. Leo blinked. Happy? Yes, she said. Last night you made everyone else feel something. Now I want to hear what happiness sounds like. Your happiness. He hesitated, then sat down at the bench. He placed his fingers on the keys and closed his eyes. Slowly, a gentle, cheerful tune filled the room, bright and hopeful like sunlight dancing on water. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of life. As he played, Evelyn's eyes softened. She remembered being young, before the money, before the mansion, before her heart had turned to stone. She remembered her own father, a humble man who used to hum while fixing things around their tiny house. The sound of Leo's piano brought all that back. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. "You have a gift, Leo, a rare one." "Mr. Harris taught me a little," Leo said quickly. "He showed me the notes." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then I owe him my thanks." She paused, then added, "How would you like to learn properly? With a real teacher?" Leo's eyes widened. "A teacher? For me?" She nodded. "Yes, I'll pay for your lessons." "You'll practice here at this piano." Leo could hardly believe what he was hearing. He stammered, "But I thought you didn't want me to touch it." Evelyn looked down, a hint of shame crossing her face. "I was wrong," she admitted quietly. "You've earned the right." "Wrong," she admitted quietly. "You've earned the right." Rosa, who had been waiting outside nervously, peeked through the door just in time to see Mrs. Parker placing her hand gently on Leo's shoulder. The sight brought tears to her eyes. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The mansion that once felt cold and distant began to hum with warmth and life. Each morning, Leo practiced the piano in the music room, filling the house with melodies. The servants stopped to listen, smiling as they worked. Even Mrs. Parker began spending more time there, sometimes sitting silently in a corner as he played, a soft expression on her face. One day, as she watched him practice, she asked quietly, "Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you touch my piano?" Leo looked up. "That you were angry," he said innocently. She laughed softly, a sound so rare that even Leo stopped playing in surprise.
"I was," she admitted.
"But not because you touched it. Because I saw something in you I lost long ago. Passion, courage, innocence." Leo smiled shyly and said, "Maybe music can bring it back." Evelyn's eyes glistened. Maybe it already has. From that day on, she treated Rosa and Leo differently. She no longer spoke with disdain or superiority. Instead, she began asking Rosa about her life, her struggles, her late husband. For the first time, she truly listened, and when she looked at Leo, she no longer saw a servant's child. She saw a young artist, a spark of something pure that money couldn't buy. A few weeks later, Evelyn hosted another small gathering. But this time it was different. There were no diamond chandeliers, no fancy dresses, no orchestra. Just a few close friends, soft candlelight, and Leo at the piano. When he began to play, everyone fell silent. The music was gentle, full of love and peace. Evelyn sat beside Rosa, smiling genuinely. The once cold mansion now echoed with laughter and music instead of silence. When the performance ended, Evelyn turned to Rosa and said softly, "You were right. The boy didn't just bring music to this house. He brought life back into it." Rosa smiled humbly. "He brings light wherever he goes, ma'am." Evelyn looked at Leo with pride, her voice trembling. "Then I suppose I should make sure that light never fades." And in her heart she knew. She had already made her decision. The boy she once mocked would soon become the son she never knew she needed. The weeks that followed became a turning point, not just for Leo and Rosa, but for the entire Parker household. The mansion that had once felt like a museum, silent, cold and full of rules, now hummed with life. Every morning the sound of piano notes floated down the corridors, soft and full of feeling. The servants worked with lighter steps, smiling as they heard the boy practice. The walls that had echoed only with orders and criticism now carried music. Music that made even the loneliest corners feel alive again. Leo was no longer just the maid's son. He had become the soul of the house. Mrs. Evelyn Parker, who once ridiculed him, now came down each morning to listen to his lessons. She would sit quietly on the sofa near the piano, a cup of tea in hand, her expression gentle and thoughtful. Sometimes she even gave small suggestions, not because she knew much about music, but because she wanted to be part of his growth. For Leo, it was a dream. For Rosa, it was a miracle. Evelyn began arranging professional piano lessons for him with one of the best teachers in the city. She covered the expenses herself, though she never bragged about it. When the teacher arrived for the first time, he was skeptical, until Leo began to play. Within minutes, the man's face changed from disbelief to amazement. "This boy isn't just talented," he said softly. "He's a prodigy." Mrs. Parker smiled proudly. "I know." As Leo's lessons continued, word spread. The story of the maid's son who could play like an angel reached beyond the mansion walls. Guests from previous parties began asking about him, and soon Evelyn found herself receiving invitations for Leo to perform at other events. Rosa was hesitant. "He's just a child," she told Mrs. Parker one evening. "He doesn't need fame. I just want him to have a normal life." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Rosa, your son was born to shine. Don't let fear hold him back." Her voice softened. "You've given him love and strength. Let me give him a chance." For the first time, Rosa saw not the cold, proud woman she once feared, but someone who cared deeply, who had changed. A few months later, Leo's first public recital was held at a grand concert hall in the city. The posters outside didn't say the Maid son. They simply said Leo Parker piano recital. Yes, Parker. Evelyn had gone to court quietly, fulfilling her promise from long ago, the one she had made mockingly. "If you can play this piano, I'll adopt you." This time it wasn't a joke. It was real. The adoption took Rosa by surprise. She cried the day Evelyn told her. "You don't have to do this," Rosa said, wiping her tears. Evelyn smiled gently. "I'm not taking him away from you, Rosa. I'm joining your family. You and Leo have given me more love than I ever knew I needed." Rosa's heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time she felt seen, respected. On the night of the recital, the hall was full. Elegant guests filled the seats, and a buzz of anticipation ran through the crowd. On stage, under the soft glow of golden lights, Leo sat at a gleaming black piano. His heart raced. He thought about where he had started, the dusty servants' quarters, the night he first touched those forbidden keys, the scolding, the tears, and the laughter. He thought about Mr. Harris, who had taught him in secret about his mother's sacrifices and about Mrs. Parker's transformation. Then he began to play. The music that poured from his hands was pure magic. It wasn't just sound, it was a story of struggle and forgiveness, of pain and hope, of two women from different worlds united by love for one child. Every note shimmered with emotion, filling the hall with warmth. People wept openly. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet, applauding wildly. Among them, Rosa and Evelyn stood side by side, tears glistening in their eyes. Evelyn squeezed Rosa's hand and whispered, "You raised a miracle." Rosa smiled. "We raised him together." Years passed. Leo became one of the most celebrated pianists of his generation. Reporters wrote about his incredible journey, from a maid son to a world-class musician. But every time he was interviewed, he said the same thing. "My music isn't just mine. It belongs to my mother, who taught me love, and to Mrs. Parker, who taught me forgiveness." At the Parker mansion, now quieter but warmer than ever, the grand piano still stood in the same spot by the window. Evelyn, older now, often sat there listening to recordings of Leo's concerts. The sunlight reflected off the keys, and she smiled softly. The piano that once symbolized pride and wealth had become a symbol of compassion and redemption, a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the course of many lives. And somewhere far away on a grand stage lit by golden lights, Leo's fingers danced across the piano, still playing not for fame, not for applause, but for the people who believed in him when the world laughed. The maid's son had not only been adopted by a millionaire's wife, he had been adopted by destiny itself.